They called her a sorceress, a priestess, a madwoman. But to her people, she was a voice from the gods, an oracle whose words could turn the tide of war, shake empires, and summon courage from the hearts of the broken. Picture this: a quiet colonial village. A British officer receives word of an uprising, not led by a general, not by a king, but by a woman, cloaked in white, speaking in tongues, surrounded by firelight and trembling villagers who hang on her every word. She speaks of visions, she speaks of war, she says the white man's rule will end in blood, and it begins. Who was she? How could a single woman, armed not with weapons but with visions, terrify entire colonial regimes? Why did governors, missionaries, and generals keep her name in secret reports, fear her prophecies, and above all, try to silence her forever? This is not just a story of resistance, it's a story of power. The kind of power that doesn't come from guns or gold, but from spirit, from ancestral knowledge, from the unshakable belief that freedom is a divine right. In colonized Africa, oracles weren't mere religious figures. They were spiritual warriors, political agitators, and rallying voices for the oppressed. Their presence could shake a village or start a revolution. Their prophecies ignited hope in the hearts of the enslaved and sent shivers through the colonial elite. The colonial powers tried everything: exile, execution, mockery. But you can't colonize belief. You can't erase a voice that speaks from the soul of a people. This is the story of an oracle who refused to be silenced, a woman whose name still echoes in chants, in shrines, in dreams. Some say her words were magic, others say they were madness. But what's certain is this: she changed everything. In the next 20 minutes, we'll explore her origin, her visions, and the unstoppable force she became. Forgotten by textbooks, feared by empires, this is the oracle that colonial powers couldn't destroy. Let's begin. Before we meet the oracle herself, we must first understand the world she was born into. A world already on fire. The late 19th and early 20th centuries marked the height of European colonial expansion across Africa. The Berlin Conference of 1884-85 sliced the continent into territories like pieces of cake. At a dinner table, none of the locals were invited to. From British-ruled Nigeria to German East Africa, entire kingdoms were dismantled overnight. Languages were banned, religions were outlawed, sacred groves were burned. The invaders brought guns and Bibles, railroads and whips, and in their wake they left broken societies, confused, grieving, angry. But beneath the ashes of conquest, something powerful still lingered. Indigenous spirituality, often dismissed as superstition by the colonizers, wasn't just a set of rituals. It was a living, breathing system of knowledge, a way of understanding the world, a map to the invisible forces that governed life and death. In many African societies, the spiritual world and the physical world weren't separate. They coexisted, intertwined like vines. At the center of this spiritual landscape stood the oracle. In Igbo society, it might have been the Agbara or the Afa priestess. In the Congo, it could be an Nkisi prophet. In Zimbabwe, it was the spirit medium of Nahanda. These figures weren't just advisors or healers, they were intermediaries between the human and the divine. They could channel the voices of ancestors, they could predict the future, and they held immense social and political power. Oracles spoke with fire, and their fire caught quickly. To the people, they were vessels of truth. To the colonizers, they were dangerous, because when an oracle declared, "The ancestors say rise," whole villages did. Their words ignited courage where fear had taken root. They united tribes that had once warred. They restored a sense of identity, a spiritual center, a reminder that the soul of a people cannot be colonized. Colonial authorities knew this. That's why oracles were often the first targets of missionary campaigns and colonial suppression. They were labeled witches, lunatics, threats to civilization, but the people believed in them deeply. Because these spiritual leaders didn't just offer comfort, they offered resistance. When the rifle broke the sword, the spirit remained. The colonizers brought chains and crosses, but they could not chain the spirit, so they turned to propaganda. They called the oracles hysterical. They made examples out of them. They imprisoned them, executed them, wrote them out of history. But something about their presence always returned. You can exile a body, but not a belief. In the absence of kings who had been toppled and chiefs who had been corrupted or co-opted, it was the oracles who carried the torch of freedom. Their shrines became secret meeting places. Their prophecies became codes. Their presence reminded people that though the empire ruled their land, it did not own their souls. And so, in this landscape of chaos and hope, oppression and prophecy, our oracle emerged. Born not in a palace, but in a village touched by both ancestral wisdom and colonial violence. Her visions would cut through the fog of conquest like lightning in a storm. Her voice would rise from the soil of a continent in chains. But her message? It was liberation. She wasn't born in a temple. She didn't descend from royalty. Her beginning was humble, almost invisible. A child of the earth, born to a farmer and a midwife in a small thatched hut tucked between hills and rivers that sang the old songs. But from the start, she was different. The elders say she spoke before she could walk, not words, but chants. That when she was a baby, wild animals wouldn't harm her. That lightning once struck a tree beside her, and she didn't even flinch. Whether these stories are legend or truth doesn't matter. What matters is that the people believed them. And belief, as we know, can be more powerful than fact. Her visions began young. At first, they came in dreams. She'd wake up crying, murmuring names no one recognized. She'd stare into the fire for hours, eyes glazed, whispering things she couldn't remember later. Her parents thought she was cursed. The villagers thought she was touched, by gods or demons, no one knew for sure. But one thing was certain, she wasn't ordinary. By the time she turned 15, she had become a voice people feared and followed. She predicted droughts. She warned of sickness. She spoke of strangers coming with pale skin and silver crosses long before the first missionaries reached their valley. And when those strangers came, everything changed. At first, the people welcomed them. They were taught to kneel, to read, to forget, but she refused. She told her people, "Do not drink their water, for it is laced with forgetting. Do not eat their bread, for it will make you forget your mother's name." She was beaten for speaking out. She was banned from churches. Still, she spoke. One night, she vanished. Some say she went into the forest to fast. Others say the spirits took her. She returned 3 weeks later, gaunt, silent, and glowing with something no one could describe. She said the ancestors had spoken. She said the land would bleed. She said freedom was coming, but not without fire. From then on, she wasn't just a strange village girl. She was a prophet, an oracle, a vessel. Her word became law to some, blasphemy to others. And as colonial grip tightened, her voice only grew louder. The empires had guns, but now the people had her. Her words weren't vague riddles, they were thunderclaps. She spoke of red rivers, of trees that weep, of children rising with fire in their hands and elders chanting war songs at dawn. She named dates. She pointed out hills and valleys where battles would unfold. And most chilling of all, many of those things happened. Not always as she said, but close enough to make even the most skeptical pause. Villagers came from miles away just to hear her speak. Some brought offerings, cola nuts, palm wine, woven cloth. Others brought questions. Will my son return from the labor camp? Is my daughter cursed? Will the rains come? She answered with eerie precision. But it wasn't the personal prophecies that made her dangerous. It was the collective ones. She said, the white man will fall, but only when the people become one. She said, they build railways to carry away your soul, tear up the tracks. She said, the spirits are not sleeping. They are sharpening their spears. To colonial authorities, this was more than superstition. It was sedition. The local administrators began to notice that wherever she traveled, resistance followed. Villages refused to pay taxes. Youths ran away from forced labor camps. Entire communities turned their backs on churches and colonial schools. They were listening to her. And more dangerously, they were organizing around her visions. Missionaries warned that she was a threat to progress. Soldiers called her a witch. Secret colonial memos described her as a destabilizing spiritual agent and suggested immediate surveillance. But tracking her was near impossible. She moved with no schedule, no guards. People protected her. Whole villages lied to officials to keep her safe. And still, she prophesied. One day, she declared a great war was coming. A fire will come from the coast, she said, and the mountains will echo with screams. Weeks later, a rebel group, inspired by her visions, attacked a colonial outpost. The retaliation was brutal. Dozens were killed. But something had shifted. The people didn't back down. They remembered her words. Freedom demands blood. The colonizers now saw it clearly. This woman wasn't just a priestess. She was a symbol, a fuse, and the spark had already caught flame. The empire struck back, as it always does when afraid. They sent soldiers. They raided villages that sheltered her. They burned shrines, jailed elders, confiscated drums and masks. But every time they thought they had cornered her, she disappeared like smoke. Word spread that she could vanish into trees, that she walked in dreams, that bullets could not touch her. But she was human, and eventually, they caught her. It was a rainy morning when colonial officers dragged her from a hut in chains. They paraded her through the town square like a war trophy. Children wept, elders turned their faces away. The sky, they say, turned darker than night at midday. Her trial was a farce. She was charged with inciting rebellion, blasphemy, conspiracy. The courtroom was filled with white faces and fear. She didn't defend herself. She didn't speak until the end. And when she did, the room fell silent. She looked the judge in the eye and said, "You are not judging me. You are judging yourselves, and the spirits are watching." They sentenced her to death, but even in death, she wouldn't surrender. As the executioners prepared their weapons, she sang, a haunting song in a language none of the colonizers understood, but all felt in their bones. They say the wind changed direction, that animals gathered at the edge of the clearing, that the trees seemed to mourn. Her body died, but her legend exploded. Word of her execution spread like wildfire, and something extraordinary happened. Uprisings broke out across regions that had never coordinated before. Farmers, traders, former soldiers, they all picked up arms. Not in her name exactly, but in her spirit. She had become a symbol, a saint of resistance, a martyr the empire could not erase. Colonial officers realized too late, killing her only made her more powerful. Because now, she wasn't just a woman, she was a story. And stories, especially dangerous ones, can't be executed. Her chants became war cries, her visions became banners, her life became prophecy fulfilled. And the empire, it cracked. Not all at once, not in the ways she predicted, but the unraveling had begun, because every oracle knows you can't kill a prophecy, you can only delay it. Years passed. Empires shifted, flags changed, streets renamed, but in the quiet corners of the continent, under the shade of ancient trees, in whispered prayers and midnight songs, her presence remained. She became more than memory. She became myth. Children heard her story before bedtime, not as a warning, but as a promise, that no matter how deep the chains, the soul is deeper. Her image appeared in carvings, her name woven into fabrics, her words etched into songs sung at weddings, funerals, revolts. The colonial archives tried to erase her. Missionaries never wrote her name in their final reports, but her legend slipped through, in coded oral histories, in half-burned diaries, in the haunted recollections of soldiers who couldn't forget the look in her eyes. That look that said, "You may kill me, but you will never rest." Modern-day activists cite her visions and speeches. Artists paint her face, half hidden in smoke. Politicians reference her when they speak of national pride, though few understand the depth of her rebellion. And in villages untouched by Wi-Fi but connected by spirit, the old ones still say, "The oracle walks where justice has yet to arrive." Historians argue about the details. Was she real? Was she multiple people rolled into one myth? Did she truly prophesy battles, or were her words shaped by revolutionaries after the fact? But those who believe, and there are many, know that truth isn't always found in archives. Sometimes it lives in pulse and breath, in the chill that runs down your spine when you hear a voice that sounds older than time, in the goosebumps when a story echoes something you thought only you felt. Her legacy is resistance wrapped in spirituality. It is political rage disguised as sacred song. It is the reminder that colonizers could take land, break bones, burn books, but they could never own the soul of the people. And that perhaps is what they feared most. Even today, in the face of new oppressions, economic, digital, cultural, her story rises like smoke through cracks in concrete. She is not just history. She is a force. She is proof that when the world tries to silence a voice born from spirit, the echo never fades. She spoke in riddles. She walked between worlds, she died in chains, and yet her voice echoes. Through generations silenced by force, through lands plundered by greed, through tongues forced to forget their names, her prophecy remains, not just in the past, but in the present. Every act of resistance, every reclaiming of language, every revival of a ritual once banned is a resurrection of her voice. Because the oracle was never just one woman. She was every rebel punished for dreaming, every healer mocked for believing, every grandmother whose lullaby carried the weight of survival. So remember her, not only as a prophet of the past, but as a mirror of now. A reminder that stories are weapons, that belief is power, and that no empire, no matter how brutal, can extinguish a people who remember who they are. Thank you for watching. If her story moved you, if it stirred something ancient in your blood, like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to remember that some voices are immortal.